Everyone ready? Okay. All right, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Rayan Othman, and I am Smile Canada's Arabic speaking service navigator. Thank you for joining us tonight for tonight's special edition of Exploring Our Intersections. This month, Smile is celebrating Black History Month, and the topic for today's session is On the Front Lines, Resisting and Healing Anti-Black Racism and Ableism. Today, we're hosting Nashiru Abdulai, and our community partner for this event today is Black Muslim Initiatives. And joining us is Sulia. Sulia, would you like to say some words about Black Muslim Initiative?
Yeah, for sure. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Sulia, and I am on the board for the Black Muslim Initiative. And BMI is a not-for-profit organization based in Toronto that is dedicated to understanding and addressing issues at the intersection of the Black and Muslim experience. We are an organization of individuals from different disciplines: law, community organizing, health, and equity. Some of us are students, others further along in their careers, but we are united by our passion and commitment to following the footsteps of the Prophet, peace be upon him, legacy of addressing social injustice, marginalization, and exclusion within our communities. At BMI, our goal is to provide spaces of healing, understanding, community, and upliftment for Black Muslims. As a relatively new organization with a lot of exciting plans and dreams for our community, what we really need is your help to continue this exciting work and make our vision a reality. So during Black History Month, we hope that you will get to know us a little bit better and help us raise funds. We need to continue doing our work through supporting our Launch Good campaign. And we're really excited to be partnering with Nashiru and Smile on this event today. Jazakallah khair, thank you.
Thank you, Sulia, for sharing. So our guest speaker today...
Yeah, I'm sorry, do you mind slowing down a little when you speak?
Sorry, habit. So our guest speaker today is Nashiru Abdulai. And Abdulai is the founder of Global Deaf Muslims, which is a nonprofit organization that strives to provide opportunities for the deaf community to learn about Islam and gain inclusion in the Muslim community. So Global Deaf Muslims started as a local community organization for deaf Muslims in Rochester, New York in 2005. While Abdullah was president of Global Deaf Muslims, he led efforts to provide access to Islam in sign language and charity service for hundreds of deaf Muslims, domestically and internationally. Abdullah has done tremendous work in the community and spearheaded GDM USA's translation of the Quran into American Sign Language, and organized 3 international conferences for deaf Muslims in Qatar in 2013, and Malaysia in 2016, and Indonesia in 2019. Abdullah has appeared for interviews with several news organizations such as Al Jazeera, CNN Indonesia, Deseret newspaper, and many others focusing on issues related to accessibility at religious services for deaf Muslims in the US and around the world. So thank you so much for joining us, Nashiru. Let's get started with today's session on anti-Black racism and ableism. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, who you are and what you do, and what motivated you to get into the work that you do now?
Yes. Well, again, my name is Nash. My sign name looks similar to the sign for trash, but it's not the same. But I was born in Ghana, and I lost my hearing when I was about 10 years old. And I lost it because of meningitis. When I was...
Hidra, your voice just cut out. I can't hear you. No, try again. Is that something? I can't hear you. That's not a deaf problem.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, better. Thank you.
Let me go back. Apologies from the interpreter. I was born in Ghana. At the age of 10, I lost my hearing, and that was due to contracting meningitis. When I was 11, I started attending a deaf school. So my experience growing up, I didn't really have a lot of access to Islam, and that impacted me later, and really to work hard and mobilize to make sure deaf people have had access. And that's been my goal for so long. And that's how I started Global Deaf Muslim. And we did have 3 organizations. First was in Qatar, and then we were in Indonesia. And we were just spreading more information about Islam. And it was just really inspiring for me to see that. And that's why I keep doing this work today.
So can you share some of your intersectional experiences as a Black deaf Muslim man?
Sure. It's pretty unique to have those 3 identities, being deaf and Muslim and Black all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I mean, obviously people can see me, I'm Black when I'm walking. That's an obvious identity. The deafness can be a challenge. Like it can be hard for people to perceive them I'm deaf. And so that's not quite as obvious as the Black identity. But being deaf, there's a lot of barriers to access. And then with being a Muslim, there's so many responsibilities in how we conduct ourselves and represent ourselves as Muslims. And Islam, I feel like there's so much diversity, and it is a challenge interacting with hearing people. But I feel like what we really need to do is realize, that deaf people can do things themselves. And I see myself as a Black person as well. And when I actually went to one of those international conferences, people were we were talking with other deaf people, and they were saying, you're Black, you're deaf, you're Muslim. And most Muslims, they didn't really, they're not used to seeing Black men in charge of Muslim organizations. But I didn't let that bother me, because my goal is to satisfy the needs of my community. And I'm not really focused on what other people think things should look like. I'm focused on what needs to be done. And my focus is on making sure that deaf people and deaf issues have their needs addressed. Yes, I am Black, and in society that means something. And then once I had a woman come and ask me about being involved with GDM, and I told her, you're welcome, but this is a deaf organized organization, deaf-led, and hearing people aren't in positions of power here. And she felt kind of off about, like, that felt a little bit unfair, because she looked at me like as a Black deaf person, and that maybe I was inferior to her in some way, and that I shouldn't be leading. But in the community, all over, there are Black issues, yes, but really what most of the issues I see within the Muslim community specifically don't really have to do with Blackness, but more it has to do with access to sign language, meeting people who sign and that I can communicate with.
Okay. So within the Black community, or the Black and Muslim community, as you mentioned, what are the attitudinal barriers that exist?
For the Black Muslim community, I would say not. I would say I really focus on myself as a deaf Muslim, and I feel like that's a primary identity for me, and that some of the issues that you face as a deaf person are a little different. And so, you know, people talk about issues of like interracial marriage and that kind of thing, and there's discrimination, absolutely. But those are like decisions that people can control on an individual level. And so, well, the fact that some people look down on me because I'm Black, that's true. But I prefer to focus on areas of advocacy and access. And that's where I think we need to focus our attitudes. So we have conferences and bring people together, but most of the time, who are the people leading the conferences? Who are the people in positions of power? I mean, you know, there's typically a man, yes, but when people see me, they're still surprised that they're like, oh man, that guy's deaf, what a shame. But that's not my perspective on it. And it doesn't really offend me or hurt me. Again, my focus is 100% on what deaf people need. So if there are organizations out there doing different things, I try not to focus on the negativity or closed-mindedness. There's American issues and there's also international issues. At the Qatar conference, there were so many Muslims who came, and there are people on the stage. And I was up there talking, and actually one person was shocked to learn that I was actually a leader of the organization. So, because there is racism in society, but I don't dwell on that because for me, I'm focused on making a change at an international level and having discussions on an international level. That's my goal, and that's what I look for. But it's important for me to not always, you know, focus on others, you know, negative attitudes towards me. I need to focus on what deaf people need.
That's great. So can you share some of your...
Well, also with the Muslim community, I think often with hearing Muslims, they misunderstand often. And some of the problems with the hearing Muslim community is that they want everything to be spoken. They feel if it's not spoken, then it's not valid. But if we don't have access to interpreters, then we have no idea what we're practicing or what we're doing. And so often that's the barrier I see from the Muslim community in general.
Interesting. So can you share some experiences where you've experienced anti-Black racism?
Well, there was one thing, I was at a conference, an MSA conference in New Jersey, and it's a big place. There were a lot of people there, and I was one of the volunteers serving food and that kind of thing. I was one of the volunteers, part of the team. But a lot of people kept misunderstanding and thinking I was there in line for food. And I kept trying to explain to them, you know, I'm here to help. And I don't know, there was a problem with communication, and we ended up actually getting the interpreter involved to try to solve this problem. But afterwards, I talked to the interpreter and tried to ask them why they think, what was happening exactly, what did they think I was saying? Because I didn't understand the miscommunication we were having. And so they thought that I was a Black person who was hurrying up to be in the front of the line to eat, instead of actually what I was there to do was to serve and volunteer like everybody else. and they just had a hard time believing that I was a volunteer because I was the only Black volunteer there. And that was kind of an interesting situation that I experienced, where people kind of pointed me out as, oh, you're Black, you can't possibly be here to work. That was very interesting. I'll never forget that. I've tried to move on. You know, I don't dwell on it, but it does stay in the back of my mind and bother me. And that's definitely an example.
Yeah, and that's very frustrating. So I get that. So how does anti-Black racism intersect with ableism in society?
Well, again, I am focusing on the deaf perspective here. For me, going to school, I was there with 90% hearing students. You know, I'm maybe like one of very few deaf people around. A lot of people thought, you know, maybe I wasn't as good at them because I was deaf, but I was just as good as everyone else. Even my writing, which often people think that people can't do as well. But still I would get pointed out as someone who's unable to do things because I'm deaf. But my deafness is really a benefit. My deafness helps me do my job. You know, my deafness helps me work with my team. And no one's better than anyone. And, you know, I stand out in most groups because I'm deaf, because I'm Black. And most people are hearing, you know, most people don't know sign language. And, you know, I'm looking at trying to achieve equality, but how can we do that if we're still trying to segment and segregate instead of really pooling all our identities and communities together? So yeah, I mean, before working at GDM, I had been turned out by many deaf by many jobs. So, for example, there was a Pakistani deaf Muslim who invited me to come speak. But as she made the offer to the organizers, they didn't want me to be there. And it's like, and then I experienced that also in the job market. When I'm doing interviews and trying to find a job, I had a lot of struggles before starting GDM. And it's because people think deaf people can't do things. And it's like, I have a degree, I'm very successful, and I still experience these frustrations because of what society deems I can or cannot do as a deaf person. But as a deaf person, I'm able to do anything. And that has been a very frustrating part of my history.
Yeah, I can see that. So how can Muslims resist anti-Black racism and ableism in society? You spoke about your experience with the Pakistani Deaf Association. So how can Muslims resist that anti-Black racism?
Well, really, hearing people should work to empower deaf people more and realize what deaf people can do. And that, you know, hearing people shouldn't be the gatekeepers. I mean, I've been going through this for so many years, for more than 15 years now, as a deaf person working in hearing spaces. And, you know, I'll admit some people are very defensive and seem unwilling to work. And I try to get them to understand my perspective and get them to understand me as a person and realize that, you know, society doesn't get to dictate my value. And so often people who just hear about my background and my successes think I'm a hearing person, but I'm not. And I know I've done a lot of collaboration in Muslim spaces, working with different organizations. And for example, I was once in Texas and there was an event there. And there was a hearing woman who was a volunteer in the organization. And she wanted to volunteer with Global Deaf Muslim at this event. And she decided to do things her own way and ignore how we had been doing things this entire time. And eventually I had to confront her and ask her why she did this. And she tried to make excuses and that kind of thing, but it kept happening again and again. And obviously she didn't respect us as deaf people and trust that we could lead in our work. And I would notice after all these events and things, hearing people would often leave changed and, you know, inspired, but deaf people often didn't get the benefit because people aren't respecting the spaces as deaf spaces. And really, it's a complete inversion of what the message is supposed to be. Things are supposed to be in sign language, and we're trusting interpreters to get our message out there to hearing people. And I've noticed that it is a challenge often with deaf and hearing groups to have hearing people see deaf people as equals, and to be truly being able to be open to listening and to mutual support and communication instead of just ordering us around. And that needs to change, and it is changing, but we need more organizations to fight for that kind of equality.
So how can we as an organization, how can SMILE as an organization and as a community tackle these intersectional barriers and make a difference?
Before actually I came here, I actually worked with Kina, and she's a really great person. She actually volunteered with Global Deaf Muslim, and she's a really great example for other people to follow. She worked with us for about 2 years, and she was always willing to say yes. And so Sakina's a really great person, and who is always willing to work and do what's needed. And I think now that she's involved with SMILE, I think follow with her at the helm, that's exactly what your organization needs. And you know, to really empower children, empower the future generations, and empower them to make decisions for themselves, have agency, and not just blindly follow others, but realize that, you know, kids they can do anything. I met a kid once who had Usher syndrome. His name was Abbas. And he was just so impressive. And he was a kid. And I was just so amazed to meet him and know him. And I told him, you know, and reminded him that, you know, you can do anything you want. You can do anything that you try. And I think SMILE is a wonderful organization that's very supportive of families. And I think the way that you support families that include people with disabilities like Usher syndrome, blindness, etc. The fact that you've hired interpreters for this event, that you, maybe in the future you could have a deaf interpreter here. The fact that this organization is willing to collaborate and work and support. And I think, deaf people know that they can learn from you and you can learn from them. And to Kina, I learned a lot from her, and I'm sure she learns a couple of things from us in the years we worked together.
Yes, Akina is great. That's right. So what are some of the major takeaways for people who may be new to this discussion on intersectional discrimination with respect to anti-Black racism and ableism?
I just want them to know that the world, just be aware of deafness. And we talk a lot about Black people and our challenges and discrimination and oppression, police violence, etc. And absolutely, I'm a father of 2 children. Those things are top of mind for me. And I have the same concerns other parents do. But I think deaf Muslims are often forgotten. And I think we need to remember that the deaf community exists and not continue to oppress them and marginalize them. And realize that, there can be multiple stories at the same time. While Black people are being oppressed, deaf people are being oppressed as well. And and for people like me, that kind of oppression just gets compounded. And so I see that often, that we're focused just on Black lives and not realize all the intersectionalities that come with those Black lives. And it's really challenging in general with Black people. And I'm a Black deaf person, and many organizations, I don't see that kind of support. So like when George Floyd was murdered, I didn't see like the visibility for the deaf communities grieving. And as a deaf person, I do experience the same kind of discriminations, and they just may not be shared because I'm deaf. But as we're going through those experiences, I hope Muslims know that no race is better than another. All men are equal, and the only difference is in our piety and our faith. And hopefully we can all follow the example of the Prophet and try to be the best in our societies, and partner with other organizations and Muslims who are different than us. And we want to partner with you. And I want to be part of the change.
Your insight and your lived experiences with the audience today.
Sorry, Rayanne, you froze a little bit at the beginning. Do you mind saying that again?
Repeating. Okay, sorry. My internet is terrible.
Oh, me start from the beginning? Oh no.
Okay.
Okay. I thought you wanted me to start my comment all over again. Did you need me to start over again? I was just saying. No. It's Rayanne, and we need Rayanne to do hers again because she froze. Not you. No. Oh, okay. That's fine. Go ahead.
So I was just saying thank you so much for sharing your insight and your lived experiences with the audience today. And I wanted to say thank you to Anissa and to Hidra for joining us. And I just wanted to open up the floor for a few questions that we have on the Facebook Live. Just give me 1 second. So while we wait, Sulia, do you want to speak about your Launch Good campaign?
Assalamualaikum. Happy to be back. Thank you so much, Nishiro. I think just for us, as we also start to think about community organizing, I think there's a lot that our organization can definitely take away from what you said today. So jazakallah khair for that. Super exciting and a lot to think on as we community organize. And just on the topic of, I guess, of course, creating safe spaces. It is Black History Month, and we are a part of Launch Good's Black History Month campaigning. And we are trying to raise money to kind of actualize a lot of our hopes and dreams for BMI. And so we are just pleading with the community to, I've linked the Launch Good campaign on our Facebook. So inshallah, no amount is too small. So just please help us donate, share, and jazakallah khair. Thank you for this.
Thank you. So we do have one question. And the question is, Nashiru, what advice would you give to individuals who are looking to learn more about ASL and being more inclusive of the deaf community as a hearing person?
Fortunately, there are a lot of resources available online. GDM, Global Deaf Muslim, we actually, in the USA, we have free American Sign Language courses. We offer free courses, and there are some paid courses as well. They last for a few months, and we have them several times during the year. There's a very good team. And we collaborate with the different universities, and you can learn Islamic signs as well. But specifically for Islamic signs and Islamic organizations, if you have deaf children, because you need to teach deaf children and also hearing children of deaf adults, because they may not have access as well. And so because their parents may not have access, the kids don't get access, and so then they need support to send their kids to get those resources. But yeah, that'll absolutely help if you could support the GDM classes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for giving us some knowledge on global deaf Muslims and the deaf Muslim community. Thank you, Anisa. Thank you, Hidra, and thank you, Sulia, for joining us from the Black Muslim Initiative and Islamic Relief. Assalamu alaikum.